الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله وسلم عليه وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. وبعد, inshallah, we'll continue where we left off last week. The Imam was mentioning different sins or the states of the affairs of the people from the grave or when they go to the next life. And we're still under the chapter of not being fooled or being deceived by just depending upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy without doing the actions required of you, or thinking you could do any sins whatsoever and get away with it. Right, so he's continuing on. We didn't get to finish the chapter mentioning the different ahadith or sayings of the Prophet ﷺ, mentioning the consequences, of doing some of these sins and what the state of that person will be on the Day of Judgment or when he's in his grave. And as we were going through the book, like we said, the sickness and the cure, one of the ways to stop sins is to think of their consequences. Right, so this is another reason the Imam is mentioning in this chapter. Because the more you think of the consequences of what's going to happen to you, that could happen to you in this world or the next world, the less likely you are to continue in certain sins. So the Imam, he continues mentioning the next hadith. عن جابر قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كل مسكر حرام وإن الله عز وجل عهد لمن شرب المسكر أن يسقيه من طينة الخبال قيل وما طينة الخبال قال عرق أهل النار أو أعصاره أو أعصار أهل النار. So he said that the Prophet ﷺ, he said that every muskir, every intoxicant is haram. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised the ones who drink the intoxicants like wine, alcohol, and scholars say that drugs go under this punishment as well, because the muskir or sukr or khamr is something that covers the mind, and any type of drug that does the same thing as alcohol can fall under the same thing. So he's saying anyone that does this, drinks from this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised him that he will be made to drink from the tinat al-khibal. And the Sahaba asked, what is the tinat al-khibal? And the Prophet ﷺ said, like the sweat or the fluids that come out of the people of the hellfire. In another narration, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إني أرى ما لا ترون وأسمع ما لا تسمعون أطت السماء وحق لها أن تطي أو تأتى ما فيها موضع أربع أصابع إلا وعليه ملك ساجد لو تعلمون ما علموا لضحكتم قليلا ولبكيتم كثيرا وما تلذذتم بالنساء على الفراش ولخرجتم إلى السعادات تجأرون إلى الله عز وجل. He's saying that the Prophet ﷺ also mentioned in another hadith that I see that which you do not see, and I hear that which you do not hear. The sama, the skies above, are moaning or screaming, right? And he said, and they have a right to do so, because there's not a place that's bigger than 4 fingers width, except there's an angel making prostration. And he said that if you know what I know, you would laugh little and you would weep much. And you would not even think about satisfying your desires with your spouses on their beds. And rather you would climb out or walk out into the streets praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking for forgiveness. Because the more taqwa you have, the more you realize the reality of the situation. And the Prophet ﷺ, of course, is the best of the messengers and the most pious of the people. And he sees things that we don't see, like he's saying, and he hears things that we don't hear. So his iman is way up there. And he's saying, like, imagine not a place that's 4 fingers wide, except there's an angel in it making prostration. Right? The angels of light. The whole sky is filled with them prostrating. Another narration how the angels, 70,000 angels will enter into Bayt al-Ma'mur, which is like the Kaaba for the angels, every day and never to return. Every day 70,000 angels making tawaf, entering. How many angels that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created? Right? All of them glorifying Allah, praising Allah, bowing in prostration. And we humans, we take that for granted, because we don't really know, like, except what the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us and what Allah is teaching us in the Quran, we don't really know. But if we ponder upon what we're being taught, and we realize the severity of the Day of Judgment and the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we would have humbleness and we would be scared. We wouldn't have time to be laughing all the time or playing games, And then the Prophet ﷺ, there's another hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, he kept staring at the grave, and the Sahaba asked the Prophet ﷺ, like, what's wrong? Because the Prophet looked as he was worried and he was, concerned. And the Prophet ﷺ said that the believer, he will feel a pressure on him, like when he goes into the grave, that will be squeezed so hard, like it'll make his veins pop out. That's the pressure that you're going to feel. Like, can you imagine someone squeezing your hand until your veins pop out? So the believers, he's saying, will feel that pressure when they go into the grave. So imagine the evildoers or the disbelievers. Then he mentions the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا وُضِعَتْ الْجَنَازَةُ وَاحْتَمَلُهَا الرِّجَالُ عَلَى أَعْنَاقِهِمْ فإن كانت صالحة قالت قدموني قدموني، وإن كانت غير صالحة قالت يا ويلها يا أين تذهبون بها، يسمع صوتها كل شيء إلا الإنسان ولو يسمعها الإنسان لصائقة. He said that when the janazah, the funeral bier, is being carried upon the shoulders of the people, the believer, the salihin, the righteous, will be saying, hurry up, because they're waiting to go into their nice abode, and they will see the paradise and what's waiting for them, and they'll be happy. But the disbeliever will be like, woe is me, don't, where are you taking me, out of fear. Then he mentions the hadith on the Day of Judgment. So all these are like stages, basically. First you go to the grave, and then there's the trials of the grave, and then he's talking about the Day of Judgment, how the sun will come down close to where the people are standing, and basically they will be sweating in accordance to the amount of sin that they have. So some people have sweat like up to their ankles, some people up to their knees, some people up to their thighs, some people will have sweat all the way over, covering their mouths, basically, like they're almost drowning in their own sweat out of fear. This is the severity of that day. Another narration, Aisha radiallahu anha was asked, she asked the Prophet ﷺ, like, the people were going to be without clothes that day, and the Prophet ﷺ said yes, and she was like, isn't that embarrassing? And the Prophet ﷺ said they're going to have a greater affair to be thinking about. So if you go out naked now, you're obviously going to be ashamed, you're going to be concerned, or if you see somebody walking in the streets naked, you're going to be shocked and surprised, right? It's just normal. But on the Day of Judgment, you'll be so concerned about what's going to happen to you, you won't even be paying attention to that. And that's like a natural thing for human beings to be attracted to the flesh, right? But on that day, you're so worried, the flesh is not going to have you're not going to even have time to think of that. Then he says, the Prophet ﷺ said, إن أحدكم إذا مات عرض عليه مقعده بالغداة والعشي إن كان من أهل الجنة فمن أهل الجنة وإن كان من أهل النار فمن أهل النار. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that as you're in your grave, the people of paradise will see their place in paradise, right? And the ones who are from the people of the hellfire are going to see their place in the hellfire. In another narration, that those people that see their place in paradise will be asking for the Day of Judgment to come quickly so they can go to Jannah. And then the people that see their place in the hellfire will ask to delay the Day of Judgment so they won't have to go into the hellfire. Even though they're in punishment there, the punishment that waits them is even worse. ثم قال صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا صار أهل الجنة في الجنة وأهل النار في النار جُئِيَ بالموت حتى يقفوا بين الجنة والنار ثم يذبح ثم ينادي منادي يا أهل الجنة خلود فلا موت ويا أهل النار خلود فلا موت فيزداد أهل الجنة فرحا إلى فرحهم ويزداد أهل النار حزنا إلى حزنهم. So he said, on that day, the Day of Judgment, when the people of paradise will enter into paradise and the people of the fire will enter into the hellfire, the maut, the death will come and be slaughtered. So there'll be no more death. And it will be said, a caller will call out, O paradise, you are in there forever, no more death. And O people of the hellfire, you are in there forever, no more death. So the people of paradise will increase in their happiness, and the people of the hellfire will increase in their grief. Like, that's a scary moment. You can imagine there's no more second chances after that. That's it. Like, death is slaughtered. There's no more death. You can't die no more. It's forever. And if you're in Ahl al-Jannah, alhamdulillah, na'imun la yanfad. Pleasures that will never end. But imagine, a'udhu billah, may Allah protect us from that, the people of the hellfire. Punishment that will never end. If you're just sick for a couple of days, it feels like, how miserable you are and you want to get rid of that cold. This is just the dunya, like a cold. Or if you get cut, or if you break something, or if you hurt something, like how much pain you're in and you just want to get over that pain, right? Imagine if it's never ending pain and the severity of that pain. Then the Imam starts talking about other individual sins, and he says, مَنِ اشْتَرَى ثَوْبًا بِعَشْرِ دَرَاهِمْ فِيهَا دِرْهَمْ حَرَامٌ لَمْ يَقْبَلَ اللَّهُ لَهُ صَلَاةٌ مَا دَامَ عَلَيْهِ. He said that if a person buys a thobe, like just one thobe, for 10 dirhams, and one of those dirhams is haram, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala won't accept his salat from him. Again, the severity of the sins and the consequence of the sins. This doesn't mean that you don't do your salat. The person has to do their salat because it's fard and has to fulfill that obligation, or else he will have double the sin. But just doing the salat with something haram, you get take into account for that haram. Another narration, he says, whoever drinks wine, their salat will not be accepted for them for 40 days. One sip of wine. And the same thing, you have to do the salat, but the punishment is you won't get the reward of that salat for 40 days. But you still have to do it. Another narration, he didn't mention this in this book here, but the Prophet ﷺ said, like, if you miss Salat al-Asr on purpose, it's like you lose your family and everything you own. Like, imagine you get a phone call one day, and may Allah protect us from that, na'udhu billah, but someone says that your house burned down, all your family members were in it, you lost everything, your family is gone. How would you feel? You couldn't imagine how sad or how hurt you would feel if your loved ones are lost like that, or if even your possessions that you lose. So the Prophet ﷺ, missing one salat on purpose is worse than that. Doing one rak'ah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is better than dunya and everything in it. So we as believers should have our priorities straight and understand, the consequences of sins. Even though some people might see them as small, they can have great effects for our dunya and our akhirah. Then the Imam talks about a person entering into the hellfire because of a fly, and a person entering into Jannah because of a fly. دخل رجل الجنة في ذباب ودخل رجل النار في ذباب قالوا فكيف ذلك يا رسول الله قال مر رجلان على قوم لهم صنم لا يجاوزه أحد حتى يقرب له شيئا فقالوا لأحدهما قرب قال ليس عندي شيء قالوا له قرب ولو ذبابا فخلوا سبيله فدخل النار وقال الآخر قرب فقال ما كنت لأقرب لأحد شيئا من دون الله عز وجل فضربوا عنقه فدخل الجنة وهذه الكلمة الواحدة يتكلم بها العبد يهوى بها في النار أبعد ما بين المشرق والمغرب. So he's saying that two people came to a village. In that village you cannot pass through it except if you sacrifice something for their false gods. So they asked one of the men to sacrifice something for their god so that he can pass through. He said, I don't have anything. He said, sacrifice even if it's a dhubab, like a fly. So he sacrificed a fly for that god, and because of that, their false god, because of that he entered the hellfire. And another person, he was told that the same thing, and he said, I'm not going to sacrifice anything for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they killed him and he entered into paradise. And then he says, a person can say one word that will enter him into the fire, the distance between al-mashriqi wal-maghrib, the distance between the west and the east. Just one word, a person, he can say it, not even thinking about it. Like this person, that's not a big deal, I'll just sacrifice a small little fly, just so I can pass through. It enters him into the hellfire. Right? A kalimat of kufr can take a person into hellfire. A person makes fun of something of the deen, not thinking it's a joke, that's not a big deal, it enters him into the hellfire. The distance between the east and the west. Then the Prophet ﷺ is reported to say that beware of the minor sins, for they gather within a man until they destroy him. And we said this before, always look at not like the smallness of the sin that you're doing, but at the greatness of the one who you're sinning against. Right? The small sins, they can turn into big sins, especially if a person looks at them as small. Like if a person thinks this small sin is inconsequential and he doesn't really care about it, that's when it could be turned into a major sin. Right? If you think like, it's not a big deal, that means that you're not really caring about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enough to stop that sin. Right? And it becomes easy for you to do, and you start doing it more and more and more till it's like no big deal. That's when it can become into a major sin. Then he mentions the hadith again we talked about before about the sirat. So you're going from the grave to the mawqif to the sirat, trying to pass that bridge. We said it's thinner than a hair and sharper than a sword, and some people will cross. Everybody will have to cross across it, right? And some people move across at the speed of light, very fast, like lightning. Some people will move across like riding the horses. Some people will be running. Some people will be walking quickly. Some people will be walking slowly. Some people will be crawling, and then some people will be hooked with the thorns from the hellfire and be brought into the hellfire for punishment. And they said when the angels pull some of these believers from the sirat into the hellfire, they will remain there until they are burnt. But their prostration, where they used to prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will not be burnt when we touched by the fire. So these are even believers, because of the hadith says the prostration marks. That means that they used to make salat, they used to offer salat. But even them, they're entering. Somehow they did certain sins that they did too many sins that their good deeds were not more than their bad deeds, and they had to be punished, for example. So they ended up in the hellfire, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of the honor for the one who prays to him and bows to him and prostrates to him, he will not burn that place where prostration was made. So we should always increase in our prostration and sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these people will be taken out of the hellfire, after they've fulfilled their expiation of their sins, and they will have water placed upon them, and they will grow afresh. It's called Ma'ul Hayat, the water of life. There's a lot of the hadith we went through already, so I'm just trying to pass through it, inshallah. Then the Prophet ﷺ, in another narration, he says that the one who unjustly demands something from his brother, and takes like a dinar or dirham unjustly, then he will have his good deeds taken on the Day of Judgment to settle the matter. If his good deeds are not enough, then the bad deeds of that person will be placed upon him. Right? So sometimes people will do injustice to somebody and think they get away with it. They might try to rob them in their business dealing. They might try to swindle them or think they got off on them. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. And then on the Day of Judgment, you think you have all these salat and fasting and these good deeds, but you come and they're taken away from you because you did injustice to this person, you stole from this person, you cheated this person, you backbited this person. Haba'an manthura, those mountains and great valleys of good deeds that you had, all gone because you ruined them. You prayed Salat al-Isha and then you went out with your friends and backbited a person the whole night. You lost all those good deeds. We always have to be very careful about falling into sin or doing injustice to anybody. Right? That's why the Imam, he's telling us all these narrations to make us think about what we're going to face in the grave. What are we going to face on the Day of Judgment? Right? What are the effects of these sins? You must think of the consequences. This will help you stop from falling into these sins in the first place. Another narration, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the fire of the hell is 69 times greater than the fire of the dunya. So I think like the fire of the dunya can get up to 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Imagine that times 69. And that's the smallest punishment, or the smallest fire of the hellfire. And we said before how that the one who is least punished in the akhirah will be put on 2 coals and it will make his brain boil. That's the least punishment. Then he mentions a narration by Mu'adh radiallahu anhu. He said, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam instructed me to do 10 things. Do not associate with Allah partners, even if you are killed or burnt on that account. Like look at our brothers and sisters now in Burma. SubhanAllah, they're being burnt alive for saying La ilaha illallah. So the Prophet ﷺ saying, even if you're killed or burnt, don't negate that. And then he told Mu'adh, don't be disobedient to your parents, even if they command you to abandon your family and your property. The rights of the parents are very, very important. After Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala worshipping Him alone, He says, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Have goodness to your parents. The Prophet ﷺ saying, even if they command you to abandon your family and your property. There was one narration that Umar radiallahu anhu asked his son to divorce his wife for no real reason. We don't know the reason, right? And this is a very tough fitna, but because of his birr to his walid, he obeyed him, right? Sometimes the parents will ask you, as long as it's not conflicting with the sharia of Islam or telling you to do something haram, you're supposed to obey them, because the pleasure of the parents is in the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's one of the greatest deeds you can do after worshipping Allah is to be obedient to your parents, right? To do good to them. How much they sacrifice for us. From the mother carrying you in her womb all those months and suffering, to the late night she has to, take care of you and feed you and wake up, never complaining, changing you, clothing you. The father struggling to provide for you. Even to your adults, to go to school, sometimes your parents are paying for your school. And then how do we treat our parents? The Prophet ﷺ is saying, even if they command you to abandon your family and your property, because all of that is from their efforts. If it wasn't for them, you wouldn't be here. Then number 3, do not deliberately neglect to observe a prescribed prayer, for he who neglects the prescribed prayer deliberately will fall away from the protection of Allah Azza wa Jal. Another narration, من ترك صلاة فقد كفر. من ترك الصلاة فقد كفر. Whoever leaves the salah has committed disbelief. And if you leave the salah, you are out of the protection of Allah Azza wa Jal. So inshallah, this is a good point to stop, so we can offer Salat al-Maghrib inshallah, and then if you guys want, I will come back and continue so we can finish this section inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Inshallah, to continue where we left off, we were talking about the statement of Mu'adh, the advice of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam when Mu'adh asked him, instruct me to do 10 things, like advise me with 10 things that I can do. And the first thing he said is, do not associate anything with Allah, even if you are killed and burnt on that account. And the next thing we talked about was, don't be disobedient to your parents, even if they command you to abandon your family and your property. And we mentioned briefly the rights of the parents, and that's like a whole topic in itself. This is not to do justice of it, but I'm just mentioning this hadith briefly. Inshallah, another time we can get more into detail. The third thing he advised Mu'adh radiallahu anhu was to not deliberately neglect to observe the prescribed prayer, for he who neglects the prescribed prayer deliberately will fall away from the protection of Allah Azza wa Jal. And if you fall away from the protection of Allah, from hifd Allah, then you are left to your own whims and desires and the shaitan, and that's a dangerous place to be in. When you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection, alhamdulillah, He guides you to do more goodness and stay away from the evil. But if you fall away from that protection, then you could be led astray. Fourth, he says, do not drink wine, for it is the worst obscenity. And there's the narration how, the person was given the choice for killing, he entered into the house and the woman gave him the choice to kill an innocent child or to have illegal sexual intercourse with her or to drink wine. And he thought, to drink wine would be the least of those three evils. And the story goes, he drank the wine and fell into stupor, and he ended up having illegal sexual intercourse with a lady, and he ended up killing the child. So they call it al-Khaba'ith, it's the mother of evils. Because when you drink wine or do drugs, it can take away your aql. And your aql, they said, al-aql, yusam al-aql, yu'aqiluha, yu'aqiluka an al-haram, or yu'aqiluka an al-khalaq al-sayya. So aql prevents you, it's like it means to hold tight, or prevent you, or keep you in check. So aql, those of ulil aql, they are kept in check from having the bad character, or doing evil, or falling into disgraceful behavior. So those who drink wine, they lose the aql, and they end up doing things that they will regret, and falling into evil sins, right? And the drugs, they're in the same category, They, subhanAllah, have a great addiction in them. And if you see people who are addicts to drugs or to alcohol, it's like they're slaves of those things. They sacrifice their family, their jobs, everything just to get that high, to get that hit. And then the worst thing is that you can never get the same high, so they have to do more and more to achieve the same high, and they get worse and worse, So it's a very dangerous drug, and the Prophet ﷺ warned us gravely about it. Fifthly, he said, the Prophet ﷺ told Mu'adh, shun evil, for with evil there descends the wrath of Allah Azza wa Jal. Stay away from evil. Ittaqi shar. Because shar, evil, earns the wrath, the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if a person gets Allah's anger, what goodness can he ever have? If your Creator, the one who gave you everything, the one who is in charge of everything, is mad with you, what goodness can you achieve? And then the Prophet ﷺ said, be aware of running away from the battlefield, even if the people perish. That's from the kaba'ir. When you're standing for right and doing a just cause, it's haram to turn away, to turn your backs. Right. And number 7, and when death overtakes the people, meaning like the plague or disaster comes to the area, while you are amongst them, show steadfastness, be patient. Right. We know the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that if a plague is in a city, you're not supposed to leave that city. Right. And if you're not in that city, you're not supposed to enter it. And we talked the story about Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah radiallahu anhu, one of the great Sahabis, and from the 10 that were given the glad tidings of paradise. How he was in the city in Sham, and the plague had come to him. And Umar radiallahu anhu knew the plague was coming there, so he asked him, can you come to Medina immediately? I need your advice on an urgent matter. And Abu Ubaidah, he knew it wasn't, it was because he wanted him in Medina so he can escape the plague. But he said that, we cannot run away from the decree of Allah, and the Prophet ﷺ taught us that if a plague comes to a place, you have to remain patient and steadfast, right? And he passed away. And then number 8, he says, spend on your children according to your means. Right? Like, don't be cheap with your children, and don't be overindulgent as well. Give them what they need. There's a famous story of one of the great imams of Medina. His father had left to go do battle. He had married a woman, and she was pregnant when he left, actually. And he left, to the out far east, the borders. And he, long story short, he ended up staying there for many, many, many years. And he loved his wife a lot, but he was trying to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he had this urge, it came to him like he remembered my wife, after all these years. I wonder if she's still alive. I wonder if she's, remarried or what happened, because he was so enthused about serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he forgot, he literally like just consumed with that, trying to seek Allah's pleasure. And anyway, he comes back to the Medina, and he sees, a man. Before he left, this is the point of the story. Sorry, he left all his wealth, like in a treasure, in a case for his wife, right? And he said, like, if something happens, this is for you and our child, whoever is to come. So he came back and he found this beautiful imam in the masjid, and like so many hundreds of people around him asking him questions, and he was just amazed. And he went to the house, and he found I'm summarizing the story, I don't want to get too long into it, but basically he discovers this man that was teaching in the masjid was his son, and the money that he left with his wife, she had spent it all for him to have the best teachers in Islam, to learn the Quran, to learn the hadith of the Prophet, to learn the Arabic language, to the point where he became one of the greatest scholars of Medina. So spending the money in the good cause to help your child is what you're supposed to do, right? Sometimes the parents got it backwards. They spend all the money on things that are spoiling the child, not for his benefit of the akhirah, and he ends up corrupting the child. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling you to spend according to your means, don't go overboard, but also be wise in how you spend the money. Then he said, do not refrain from using pressure in order to train them. Like sometimes you have to discipline your children. Like the Prophet ﷺ said, order your kids to pray at the age of 7, and you can discipline them at the age of 10 if they don't. To teach them from a young age that you have to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Just like in the beginning we were talking about the importance of being kind to your parents and obeying them. This is the other way around, that the parents have to be kind to their children and teach them the right way and prioritize stuff. What kind of message do you send to the kids when you let them sleep through Fajr, but you wake them up to go to the public school, for example? What are you teaching them? The dunya is better than the salah. Right? That's people have their priorities straight. They have their priorities confused, and they should get their priorities straight. The salah is the most important thing in your life. Right? You teach your kids from the young age that the salah is first. Right? Look how the Sahaba raised their children. Safiya radiallahu anha, she would take Zubair and put him in a mountain with a sword as a little kid. This mountain was said to have like jinn and all types of scary stuff in it, right? And the people were like, what are you doing? Like, why would you put your son in that situation? And she's like, because I want him to be a warrior. I want him to be a man. I want him to be strong and not fear anything, right? That's how they raised the Sahaba, the children of the Sahaba. They would let them fast to the point that they're crying, and they would give them toys to play with so they won't remember that they're hungry, right? And of course, the salat was the most important thing. They would make them do salat. From the young age, they learned the love of Allah Azza wa Jal. So now people are putting the priorities on the dunya and not on the deen. You got to have enough rest so you can go to school, right? Study for your test. Oh, you can pray salat later, it's okay. The test is more important. Oh, I have a job interview, I'll pray whenever. No, the salat, inna salata kana al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta. Salat is prescribed on a specific time for the believers. That's our priorities in life. Allah Azza wa Jal first, and the deen first, right? And following the sunnah of our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Finally, he says, inculcate in them the fear of Allah. Teach them taqwa, right? And this starts from even before you have your child. A man came to Umar radiallahu anhu and complained to him about his child being disobedient. And then Umar asked around and found out that he had married a bad person as a wife, and he named the child a bad name. So teaching your son or your daughter taqwa starts from even before they are born, in choosing the spouse, in choosing the husband, in choosing the wife. This is the one that's going to raise your child. What kind of characteristic does this person have? Right? If she has beauty and she has wealth, she has status and all this stuff, but she doesn't have deen, all that stuff can disappear. And if you pass away, that's what they're going to be left with. If they don't teach your son deen, he will curse you on the day of judgment for choosing a poor spouse. The same thing with the husband. When a woman chooses a husband, for wealth or for status or whatever, and if she forgets about the deen, who's going to teach your son about salat? Who's going to take him to the masjid? Who's going to instill him the proper values, right? This is what you look for in the spouse. And also when the child is born, to name him with the best names, to teach him from a young age the importance of the deen and the salah. So all these affairs are interrelated in our deen. So these are the 10 that Prophet ﷺ advised Mu'adh radiallahu anhu with. And then he goes on to mention some of the different hadith warning again about not being fooled by yourself, like thinking that you can get away with stuff and not face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment. And he quoted the ayat, so when they forgot the warning which they had been reminded with, they opened the gates of all the goodness of this world until they were in the midst of their enjoyment, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took them with a punishment, and they were plunged into punishment and destruction, and they regretted and had deep sorrow. Like the scholars say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives the dunya to who He loves and who He hates, but He only gives iman to those He loves. Right? So if you see a person given the dunya and having all this pleasure and desire, but he has no faith or no iman or no taqwa, it's just istidraj from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he will be taken into account for it. So he ends the chapter basically warning us not to be fooled by the deception of depending upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and thinking we get away with sin and do all the wrong things, but not fear Allah or do what you're supposed to do and stay away from the sin, and that you're going to be going to paradise. Right? So some people ask, they say like, they do what they're supposed to do, but they have kind of a hard heart, like their heart is not soft. So what's the problem? Like I fast, I pray, but I don't have that sweetness of iman, or I don't have that taqwa. So the Imam and all these hadith and narrations about the akhirah and the grave and then the effects or the punishments of the sins that you do is kind of teaching us to think about the consequences, right? That's what helps you to achieve that taqwa. That's what helps you to have a softer heart. When you really think about the consequences of sin, you get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it helps you to stop doing those sins. So the sins, like we said in the beginning, no matter how small they are still sinning against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't look at the smallness of the sin, but the greatness of the one who you're sinning against. And some scholars say that sayya comes from the word su, which is like evil. And you see, it's like it harms you, it has evil effect, because the sin has harm for you, literally, in your spiritual world and in sometimes your physical world. You can have, like, it takes away from your barakah, right? It causes problems in your life. A person can do a sin, and his wife that was so loving and taking care of him and everything, supporting him, but because of that sin, her character changes completely. Like Allah can punish you in different ways. People, they're given the gift of beauty, and they use it to sin against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah changes that beauty into ugliness, right? How many people do we see that were like so beautiful as younger people, but they use that beauty in the wrong way, and when they get older they became so ugly, like they have dhulumat, like darkness in their faces, right? Like you could see some of those stars that were so beautiful when they were younger, and then like if you take their makeup off now as they're older, it's like a'udhu billah, like completely ugly, because they used the gift of the beauty that Allah gave them in the wrong way. So sayyat can have an ill effect even on your physical well-being, right? You can get punished for it in the dunya, or you can get punished for it in the akhirah, which is even worse, or you can get punished with them both, which is the worst of all. And the ma'siyah, they can leads to destruction. That's why many of the ayat and many of the hadith that we're reading, if you go to the Quran and ponder upon it, it's warning us from falling into sin. It's warning us about the evil effect of sin, right? What's haram, so we can stay away from it, because it destroys the goodness. So the author is mentioning these things, like I said, to get us to consider the consequences. That's one of the ways you can remember to stay away from sin. Like, if you think about this brief pleasure, is it really worth the punishment in the dunya or the akhirah? 5-10 minutes of pleasure, is it worth an eternity of hell or eternity of punishment, or even just a temporary punishment? Is it worth it? They say laddat as-sa'a adab ad-dahr. A small time of pleasure and leads to like a great time of punishment, right? And the opposite is true. يعني ساعة عبادة نعيم الدهر. Like a small amount of time just worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can lead to a great blessing in the akhirah, even in the dunya. When a person falls into sin and he continues to fall into sin without making tawbah, repentance, he loses the barakah, right? His sleep might not be good, his health might get bad, he can have trouble at his work. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can send punishments even now in the dunya, like a fitna happens to you for some reason, you don't know why. But if you analyze yourself, you look and you felt you're basically abusing the gift of time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you and falling into sin. So Allah is reminding you. If you are of those who take the reminder or the heed, inshallah, and you repent. Some people don't and they just get worse and worse. Like ما كان الله ليغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. Allah won't change the condition of a people until they change themselves. So many people misinterpret it, but in the general meaning, it's what the proper understanding is, if you're in a good state, Allah won't take that good state away from you until you change it yourself, meaning falling into evil. One of the ways to stay away from like falling into these sins, like I said, thinking of the consequences and using your time wisely. Like that's the gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you, the time that we have, right? Some people say, I want to go kill some time, or let's go, I'm bored, let's go do something. Like a true believer doesn't have time to waste, right? Like we don't have, a true believer doesn't even have time to waste on mubahat, let alone the stuff that's disliked or the stuff that's haram. Right? And you ask yourself, to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what am I using my time? Like how am I using my time? If you get that mindset, like when you wake up in the morning and you think, how can I please Allah the most this day? What can I do to earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure? You have a completely different mindset. Or you wake up with the mindset that I'm in a race with other people to please Allah, to do good deeds. وَسَارِيُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. Race to the forgiveness of your Lord. وَجَنَّةٍ, in the paradise. Right? If you wake up with that mindset and you try to think like, what can I do to please Allah? Inshallah, you will reach higher levels and you will stay away from the sins. So we have that concept of the consequences of the sins and what I can do to please Allah. Like if you keep yourself occupied with worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing good deeds, you won't have time to fall into the sins. Doing the adhkar in the morning, doing the adhkar at the night, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you have free time to memorize the Quran, to attend halaqah like these, inshallah. All these type of good deeds you can do, inshallah, will keep you from falling into sin and keeping good companionship. That's why marriage is also so important too, because you have that companion to keep you in check. Especially if it's a pious spouse, they can, you don't have idle time basically. So you have more time for ibadah. Even in the love that you share with the spouse, for sabilillah, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake, is a form of worship. Also, like we said, don't look at the smallest of the sin. Also, don't look at the smallest of the good deeds. Like any good deed you can do, don't think it's too small. Like the Prophet ﷺ, he said, أَحَبُّ الْأَعْمَالُ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْ قَلَّ. The most beloved deeds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the ones that are continuous, even if it's a little bit. Right? So continue to do the good deeds. And don't لَا تَحْقَرَ مِنَ الْمَعْرُوفِ شَيْئًا. Don't look down on any good deed that you can do. The Japanese, they have a concept that's called Keizan. It's like the 1 minute principle. You guys may have heard of it. But, K means change and Zen means wisdom. So their concept is like, if you do something 1 minute every day at the same time every day, you make incremental changes. And like you have a goal that you want to achieve. So you dedicate just 1 minute every day to that goal, the same time every day. Right? And then you can build upon it and add more and more. But they're saying that with that 1 minute, you can make changes. So doing that one extra good deed, inshallah, staying away from that one extra evil deed, you can make changes. It's the little things that count, and it builds into bigger things. So, inshallah, we'll stop here and continue. If we can turn that off for a second, inshallah. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروا الغفور الرحيم.